But Akika's evil deeds will not go unpunished. One day, she was seen by the villagers, talking to herself and laughing manically. They knew that she was possessed by an evil spirit and then decided to take action. In a bustling state in Nigeria, surrounded by green field and tall trees, the sun was setting in the small village of Igiri, casting a warm orange glow over the happy family of five, Mr. and Mrs. Oke, with their three beautiful children, Chuku, Obi, and Inoma. They were a loving family and everyone in the village loved them. Mr. Oke, a hard-working farmer, and his wife, Adana, a skilled trader, would often spend their evenings sitting together with their children, watching the sunset and sharing stories. Despite their struggles, they were content with their simple life. However, their happiness was short-lived. The village was facing a severe famine, and their crops were failing. Mr. Oke's farm was struggling and his wife's business was suffering. They were finding it difficult to make ends meet, and their children were beginning to feel the effects of hunger. One day, Mr. Oke returned from the farm, looking worried and defeated, with all hopes gone. He told his wife that he heard of a neighboring village called Achi that was fertile and prosperous. He suggested that they move there in search of a better life. Adana, his wife, was hesitant at first, but the thought of a better life for her children was too enticing to resist. She agreed and they began to make plans for their move. They packed their belongings into a small truck, said goodbye to their friends and family, and set off towards the unknown. The journey was long and exhausting, and suddenly the weather became cloudy with heavy downpour of rain that drenched them and their luggages, and the truck began to move slowly on a slippery, muddy road, making the journey of 5 hours to take the whole of the day. But they were filled with hope and determination. They journeyed throughout the day and night with an empty stomach and finally arrived at their destination. As they settled into their new home, Mr. Oke quickly made friends with the villagers, who welcomed him with open arms. He was a friendly man and people liked him. One of his new friends was a man named Onyeka. Onyeka was very charming and always had a smile on his face. He took a particular interest in Mr. Oke. He visited him often and brought gifts for his family. He also introduced him to their community head and showed him around. But Mrs. Oke noticed a mischievous glint in his eyes that made her uneasy whenever he comes around. Soon, Mr. Oke secured a land for himself. He farmed diligently on the land and prospered. As time went by, Mr. Oke started spending more time with Onyeka and less time with his family. They would often be seen at Ugochi's palm wine joint, drinking and chatting together. Sometimes, Mr. Oke would return home late at night, looking drunk with the smell of palm wine oozing out of his body. His wife became worried and queried him, "What has happened to you? Why the sudden change in your attitudes towards I and the children since we got to this land and you met Onyeka?" she said, her mood sad. "Woman, don't worry yourself. I am a man and I will be fine," Mr. Onyeka replied her, expressing his manly nature. He continued to go out with Onyeka, listening to his stories and advice. As time went by, Onyeka began to talk to Mr. Oke about the customs of their land. He told him that it was common for men of his status and caliber to have more than one wife. At first, Mr. Oke did not want to listen. He loved his wife and their children and did not want to hurt them. But Onyeka was very persuasive. He told Mr. Oke that having a second wife would bring him more respect, wealth, and make him more important in their village. He introduced his cousin Akika to Mr. Oke. "Good day, sir," Akika greeted, flirting herself before him. "Good day," Mr. Oke replied her, readjusting himself. Akika was a beautiful woman with 2 children of her own. She had been divorced and was looking for a new husband. Mr. Oke's mind became confused. He did not want to hurt Adana, his wife, and also did not want to disappoint his new friend. The thought of more wealth and respect with the lady flirting herself before him began to ring in his head. Finally, after much thinking, he agreed to marry Akika and they got married. Mrs. Oke became devastated and heartbroken. She wept profusely with her children and begged her husband not to leave them, but he had made up his mind. he moved out of their house and went to live in another house with Akika and her children. Mrs. Oke was left alone to care for her children. She worked very hard to provide for them, but her heart was heavy with sadness. She missed her husband and did not understand why he had left them. But she was strong and determined to take care of their children. As time passed, Akika's true nature began to reveal itself. She was cruel and manipulative and hated Mrs. Oke and her children. Mr. Oke, on the other hand, saw the difference in the character of Akika and his loving wife, Adanna, and thought of going back, but it was too late for him, as he was already entangled in the web of Akika's charm. Akika noticed his moody attitude and wanted all of his love and attention for herself, so she started plotting to get rid of Mrs. Oke and her children. She tried many times to harm them. She would sneak into their house to poison their food, but Mrs. Oke would notice that something was wrong and threw the food away. She set traps around their house, but Mrs. Oke and her children were always careful and avoided them. One day, Akika's jealousy turned into rage. She decided that the only way to get rid of Mrs. Oke was to kill her. Late in the night, when everyone was asleep, she crept into Mrs. Oke's house to harm her. But just as she was about to strike, a strange thing happened. A spirit being appeared before her. He looked very angry and warned her that if she harmed Mrs. Oke or the children, she would suffer a terrible fate. Akika was terrified and ran away into the night. Mrs. Oke was already devoted to praying and fasting, choosing to allow God help her raise her children and give them the good life they deserve. But Akika's evil deed did not stop there. She wanted all of Mr. Oke's wealth and properties for herself, so she came up with a plan to deal with him. She began to make life difficult for him. She would sit down with her leg crossed, while Mr. Oke would return from the farm with foodstuff, head to the kitchen to make food for she and her children, wash their dirty dishes and clothing. Mr. Oke now became a shadow of his former self. A once vibrant and happy man now go about the village looking tattered and unkempt. One day, as he stepped out to run errands for Akika, some women that walked by began to gossip him. This man don't enter one chance. Chai, what a pity, they said in a scornful tone and laughed. One night, while Mr. Oke was fast asleep, Akika poisoned his drink. He woke up and drank it and soon fell very ill. They took him to different native doctors, but the ailment persisted, and his stomach continued to swell. Despite the efforts of the villagers who took pity on him to save his life, but to no avail, as the poison has already destroyed some of his vital organs, Mr. Oke died. After his burial, Akika inherited his properties and wealth. The next day, Onyeka, her cousin, came to meet her, demanding for his own share of the properties. "What share are you talking about?" she asked him, her tone challenging, pretending not to understand what he was saying. "I brought this deal to you and now you want everything for yourself?" he asked her, threatening to let the whole village know of her evil deeds. "Moreover, I did not ask you to kill him. I only asked you to make him will all of his properties to you and you went ahead to kill him. You will never change, evil woman," Onyeka hammered. "Oh, I am now the evil woman, right? See kettle calling pot black. It's okay, no problem. You may come back tomorrow. For now, I am very busy," she said to him. "I don't have time to battle words with you. Tomorrow is in few hours' time," Onyeka said and left angrily. Unknowing to Mr. Oke and his family, Onyeka was never a good person to befriend. He was jealous of how Mr. Oke had prospered in a short while in their village, and in order to covet all he had, he planned with his cousin Akika, who is also an evil woman with a dark past. She had a history of using men for their wealth and abandoning them when she was done. The next day came and the news of the mysterious death of Onyeka was all over the village. Who killed him or what happened to him over the night, nobody knows. Later that day, Akika was seen celebrating in her house. Now I have everything to myself and my 3 children," she said to herself, as she also had a child with Mr. Oke before he died. She celebrated with her children, drinking and dancing all over the house. But her joy was short-lived. After 5 years of Mr. Oke's death, his spirit began to haunt her, and she started to lose her sanity. She would often see his ghostly figure standing in the corner of her room, staring at her with a stern expression. As time went on, Akika's madness consumed her, and she became a shadow of her former self. She would often be seen talking to herself, and her eyes would take on a wild, crazed look. The villagers avoided her, and her children lived in fear of her. She would often accuse them of plotting against her and would beat them mercilessly. Mrs. Oke and her children, on the other hand, were living a peaceful life. They had long moved away from the village and were starting to rebuild their lives. Chukwu and Inoma were thriving in school, while Obi became a successful farmer like his father. And Mrs. Oke thrived in her business, selling traditional crafts. They would often talk about their father and the happy memories they had of him. But Akika's evil deeds will not go unpunished. One day, she was seen by the villagers, talking to herself and laughing manically. They knew that she was possessed by an evil spirit and then decided to take action. They called upon the village elder, who was known for his wisdom and knowledge of traditional medicine. The elder diagnosed Akika with a curse and told the villagers that she needed to be cleansed. They performed a traditional ritual, and Akika was finally freed from the evil spirit that has possessed her. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Akika's children were traumatized, and her wealth and properties were gone. In the end, Akika's guilt and fear consumed her. She collapsed in the middle of the village one day and died. The villagers found her lifeless body and buried her, but no one mourned her passing. They knew the evil she had done and believed that she had finally paid for her sins. They whispered about her evil deeds and Mr. Oke's tragic fate, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and betrayal. After Akika's death, the village of Achi summoned Mrs. Oke and her children. As they arrived at the village, they came together to celebrate Mrs. Oke's strength and resilience. They honored her with a grand feast, and the children performed a traditional dance to commemorate their father's legacy. At the end, they inherited their father's wealth and properties, using it to build a better life for themselves and their community. Mrs. Oke forgave her husband's mistakes and found peace, her heart full of love and her spirit at peace. The moral lesson of this story is that greed and jealousy can lead to destruction, so we should not covet what other people have, and we should not take the life of another. For the evil we do will always come back to haunt us. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please do well to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also turn on the notification bell so you could be notified when we drop another video. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.